Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy, the daily podcast from the Takshashila Institution. And I'm Malathi Renati. And today we're looking at a question that sits at the intersection of both state capacity and civil society. So we're going to be looking at how do NGOs actually deliver services on the ground, and what does a genuine partnership with the government look like versus a purely transactional one. So to help us unpack this, I'm joined by Dr. Ankita Chakraborty. She's a dentist by training and a trustee and the treasurer at Avant Welfare Foundation. This is a Bangalore-based NGO working across urban healthcare, government school infrastructure, environment, and skilling. So thank you so much, Ankita, for being part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ms. Malathi. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Ankita. So just for our listeners, we'll structure this the way we usually do. So we look at first the Samaj, which is the society, the Sarkar, which is the government, and then we look at the markets. We'll just touch upon the markets, because broadly for this topic, it's more the society and the governments that we're looking at. Okay, so we'll basically be looking at where the need comes from, where the state fits in, and where money and the incentives sort of help shape the future of this area.
Right.
So we'll first look at this Samaj. We'll start with that. And, I was looking at some data, Ankita, and then I found that India has a pretty enormous fragmented non-profit sector, right? So the data that we see is like between 3.1 and 3.3 million are registered NGOs in India. So we have more than 3.3 million registered NGOs. And there are over 573,000 NGOs that are registered as part of the NGO Darpan portal, which is maintained by the Niti Aayog.
That's right.
We'll be coming to the NGO Darpan portal a little later. But just looking at the numbers, right, the sheer numbers of more than 3 million, there's a lot of density and there's also a lot of fragmentation as a result. Right. So, Ankita, when Avant Welfare Foundation was set up, right, back in September 2023, what gap in this crowded landscape sort of prompted you to, to fit in and want to kind of respond?
So when we set up Avant Welfare Foundation back in late 2023, we saw that despite having thousands of these registered NGOs, there was a massive, massive gap in the last mile execution and sustained trust. Okay. Now, a lot of NGOs and organizations, they do great work, but it's very fragmented, as you've mentioned. They come in, for a one-off camp, they do their work and then they leave. Now, when we were as part of this motion and doing work for the communities, we realized that the communities, they don't change through these one-day events. Now, they change through consistent on-ground presence. And over the last 3 years, we decided to focus very purposefully, deeply into a multi-year relationship that we have made. Now, whether that's working inside government schools to improve their infrastructure or building trust around urban healthcare. We wanted Avant to be the bridge that stays on the ground, listens to what the community actually requires and needs, and ensure that the resources aren't just simply distributed, but they're actually turning into long-term and sustainable impact. That's the only way you can bridge this gap between the communities and, the government and the corporates as such. That's where an NGO should actually fit itself in.
No, wonderful. I love the long-term vision, and that's more crucial, right? Because that's where the actual work is being done. So your organization's mission is around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? The SDGs, as it's known as. And so around the 4 that your organization is looking at, that's SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, SDG 4, which focuses on quality education, SDG 6, which is on clean water and sanitation, and SDG 8, which is looking at decent work and economic growth. Right. So not surprisingly, education and literacy are actually the largest single registered NGO sector in India as well. and broadly, even your organization looks at health, environment, education, and skilling.
Yes.
But skilling is the one that I was kind of curious, because I think that's an area where that not too many NGOs really venture into. And at Takshashila also, right, we have this when we are covering our public policy courses across the different themes that we do. We talk about like the government failures, market failures, and we also look at the societal imbalances. I like to call them imbalances and not failures as much. And we also look at a toolkit as to where society can bring in change, right? And there we have actually a graph which looks at the time that it takes on the x-axis and the effort that's needed on the y-axis. And in that, for societal change, there are things which at the lower end where there's less effort, less time. We're looking at norm perception, changing norms, stereotypes, and that's more that communities can play a large role in. Then we're looking at self-governance. Again, the effort and the time is smaller because it will be in smaller communities that this actually is effective. And then we're looking at broadly the ones that require a lot of time and effort. And the reason I'm just mentioning this is it sort of fits into also your organization's mission of more long-term impact. Is
Right.
that the three areas of societal change, when we look at society playing a bigger role, is social movements, which requires a lot of time because it's progressively sees results. Then we have structural transformations, which again means working very closely with the other pillars like the government, the markets, and trying to bring in that change over a period of time. But the third one, and this is the one I think really that not many people think of too much, is the awareness, the education, and the skilling.
Correct.
Because often there's always misinterpretation. There's always information that's not really percolated. There's disinformation. There's misinformation. We have all of that happening, especially now with social media and WhatsApp groups and other things, right? So I think this is where I'd like if you can talk a bit about the initiatives that you have carried out around skilling and awareness. I know there's some mention like the Little Learners Library, the Computer Skilling Center, but if you can just touch upon that, please.
Yes. So because education and skilling are so crowded, we knew our approach had to be incredibly practical and focused on the actual outcomes. And this is what we have actually taken into very serious consideration from day one.
Okay.
Now, taking our Little Learners Library initiative, for example, we realized that just giving children textbooks is not going to build enough, gravity for them to have it as a lifelong habit of learning. So we wanted to create a vibrant, welcoming space inside these government schools where the kids actually want to read, explore, grow their curiosity, and learn things. Now, it's about building a foundational literacy in this way, which feels more engaging, more one-on-one and interactive, and not forced. This is an initiative we took for the younger folks and younger kids that we have in our society. But when you look at the older youth, you can't give them a library and just be okay with it. Now, the gap isn't here about a general education. We made it digital literacy and employable skills, so that when you are skilling them also, you are giving them education that can be put to use somewhere for them in the future. So that's why we set up our Computer Skilling Center. Now, in today's world, if a young person does not know how to navigate a basic thing like a computer, now they're completely locked out of the modern job market. Now, we provide them with hands-on practical digital training in their neighborhood, which is in their schools. They're the most comfortable over there to take any extra initiative about learning or skilling. So whether it's the library for the little ones or the IT skills and skilling for the youth, everything that we are doing here at Avant is about creating a clear, dignified pathway from early literacy to actual livelihood skilling. Now, a lot of people don't generally get into the skilling center because it's a repetitive an annual commitment that you're taking. But I feel as an NGO, you have to bridge that gap. And that's how you will end up making an impact in the longer sense for the community.
Oh, that's wonderful, Ankita. And how many have you implemented thus far across?
So we have 2 computer skilling centers. One is in Bomasandra, that side, and one is towards HSR layout. And we have 4 Little Learners Library. All of them are in primary and pre-primary schools where you have kids, from grade 1 to grade 6 who are benefiting out of these. These are mostly located in government schools, primary schools towards south of Bangalore.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sure this is a scalable model if other NGOs want to kind of take a leaf off the book of Avant Welfare Foundation, right? In terms of how you all have
Yes.
deployed it, and yeah, that's nice. But one recurring finding in the service delivery literature, right, that we hear about is that community trust and that last mile presence. And you did touch upon it during your intro. Is that this is what the NGOs bring that governments often can't replicate.
Right.
We have a lot of things, many case studies of this, like, for example, Rajasthan, where an NGO actually built a health tracking platform with the district government that followed over 40,000 mothers and infants as the last mile. And we find many other examples like this. So what do you see your organization as? Is it like primarily as a trust builder? Is it more a service gap filler or something else?
So I'd say we're a mix of both, but at our core, we see ourselves as a trust builder. You can have the best service and infrastructure ready to go, but if the community does not trust the people delivering it, then the impact is zero. Now, over the last 3 years, we've learned that a community does not buy into a policy. They buy into a relationship. From our side, a perfect example of it would be how we have built this trust into our running festival, which is called a FitFest 5K, right?
Okay.
Now, instead of standing on a stage and lecturing people about difficult topics like whether it's men's health or mental health and well-being, which do carry a lot of social stigma, we've built a high-energy fitness event. Now, this is bringing together families, kids, and neighbors into this event by anchoring a tough conversation into a shared and joyful community experience. We've broken down those social walls and actually built a safe space where people feel comfortable opening up and talking about it and participating.
That's wonderful. When does it happen? Every year, right?
Yes. So this year we are scheduled for 6th of September. We do it in HSR layout. And this year we are looking at about, we already had a great participation of about 3,000 people joining us last year. So
Wow,
we're looking at similar people, and they all, as they become part of the event, they talk about their difficulties one-on-one. And it's a great stress buster for everybody.
Absolutely.
Another initiative that reflects this is our She Means Business digital campaign. Now, there we focus on highlighting and empowering the female leaders and the grassroots entrepreneurs. Now, we aren't just coming in to quickly fill the gap. We are using their digital storytelling to change the social perceptions and show women in the community what's possible and what's not, and give them a platform to actually, launch themselves into the society. So for us, also filling the service gap, whether it's putting computers into school or distributing health kits, that's just an entry point for us also. Now, the magic really starts to happen when you're staying in the ground, on ground long enough to turn that entry point into a deep multi-layer community trust. And that's how I believe NGOs can actually make an impact. Consistency is a big key over here for anybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ankita, for sharing that. And having been part of the She Means Business initiative, I know what a wonderful platform that has been, to enrich networking and connect with other women leaders as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thanks. We'll move into the Sarkar now, the government. And one very interesting fact that always stands out, right, is that we know that the government is limited by broadly three things. One is by capacity. The second is by expertise. And the third is by funds, because these are public funds, end of the day, right? It's taxpayers' money. So, but one of the goals which is very unique to the government, one of the primary goals is to achieve social equity. That's basically redistribution of the resources for public welfare. And of course, where they fail is where society should step in. That's generally the order in which it's the government that tries and then society steps in. So the focus of our discussions broadly in this segment of the government would be around education and health. So there's some interesting data that I thought I'll just share with the listeners, just to set the context before, Ankita, I ask you to jump in. So knowing that the government won't be able to efficiently implement, many of the schemes that they conduct in every nook and cranny of our country, they've introduced what's called the NGO partnership system.
Right.
Now, this is run as the NGO Darpan portal. It started under the Planning Commission and moved to Niti Aayog in 2015. But unfortunately, its legal force is somewhat left wanting. Right? So what do I mean by that? So if an NGO needs financial funding or support, it needs to register on the portal and attain a Darpan ID.
Right.
Also, NGOs registered under the CSR framework and applying for a government-linked funding need to be registered. So basically, you're forced to kind of register yourself on the Darpan ID.
Right.
And it's also a precondition for grants for FCRA registration and renewal. This is the foreign donations from outside India. You have the 80G tax exemption and even opening an NGO bank account as per the 2023 anti-money laundering rules. The Darpan ID is required. So think of it less as a law and more as a requirement or a checkbox to be ticked.
Right.
So essentially, the government is trying to put these things in place, though the quality of those the outcomes are still questionable. And one of the limitations that the government has in running this the NGO partnership system, and it's sort of been documented also, is that it's the trust deficit that runs both ways. So officials often view the NGOs as more credit competing. They're not opaque, they're not transparent, whereas NGOs view the departments as being slow and very unresponsive. The second is more the financial follow-through being the biggest gap. So we've had like the 2021 CAG audit of NGOs, right, receiving government grants, have found that fund diversion, missing separate accounts for earmarked money, and absent utilization certificates. Now, this is all has become, it's running amok, sort of, right? And CAG also has flagged that more than 54,000 crores in outstanding utilization certificates across the 34,000 grants that spans across the 15 ministries. So we're seeing a lot of money that's sort of being siphoned off in a way, if I may use that. And all of this is public money. So it's being routed through the NGOs and other grantees, and the government itself can't yet confirm it, whether it has spent as approved, right? So in economic terms, we call this, we see shades of both the principal agent issue and the rent-seeking problem occurring, where ownership and accountability is getting into murky waters, right? Now, of course, I want to shift my focus back to partnerships that are working, and which is one of the reasons why I just wanted to talk to you too, Ankita, is that can you touch upon some of the principles your organization or others you've seen at close range, right? Because you all are working with that passion, and the intention is very clear.
Right.
How have you operated with when it comes to the PPP, which is the public-private partnerships?
So when it comes to the public-private partnerships or the PPPs, the reality on the ground is that a lot of them struggle because of a mutual trust deficit, as you mentioned. Now, officials sometimes view NGO as opaque, and the NGOs find the government departments too slow. So at Avant, what we have always done is we've approached partnerships in three strict principles to make sure things actually work.
Okay.
Now, the first thing that we do is absolute financial transparency. We know about the issues with missing utilization certificates and the murky tracking that you've just highlighted. Now, to solve this, we don't treat financial reporting as a late checkbox to tick. We maintain distinct and a separate accounting for each and every earmarked project fund from day one. Now, when you can show exactly where each and every single rupee is being spent with clear data, that trust deficit with both the state and the corporate partners, it completely disappears. The second thing we do is we design for institutional alignment, not substitution. What I mean by that is we don't enter a government school or an existing urban health center to tell them what they're doing wrong, right? Or how we can replace them. We look at what their existing goals are, what are they wanting to achieve, and then we align ourselves and our initiatives into their public goals to support them. Now, that's how you act like an agile lab for them, and as a support, function is supporting their entire cause. The third thing we do is co-ownership of the data. Now, we make sure that the outcomes that we track on the ground are shared transparently with the local authorities. There's no point keeping it, blurry in any which ways. When the state sees that a local foundation is bringing structured execution, clean books, and reliable data to the table, they will stop viewing you as an outsider and start treating you as a genuine, reliable implementation partner. And that's how you can break this, I would say, a barrier or a gap that stands between the government and the NGOs.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Ankita. Thanks for spelling it out, right? There's 3 points that you covered. But there's also a genuine policy debate about whether government should be contracting out, service delivery to NGOs at all, because versus building state capacity directly. I mean, it's more like are they just throwing the responsibilities onto a different entity, or should they be taking it up? Right, that's always a question that's asked.
Right.
But under the 7th schedule of Constitution, public health, sanitation, hospitals and dispensaries, basically healthcare centers, all fall under the state list. So it's basically a state subject. So that means that the state government's primarily responsibility is to legislate, manage, and deliver all of these healthcare services. So that's one point I just want to bring up. So just a couple of examples that I came across which argue for contracting it out to NGOs, like, outsourcing the work to an NGO, and it's been done well, is the Karuna Trust's PHC, which is the Public Health Centers model. And this is the most cited example in our Indian context. So under this PPP, it runs around 48 primary healthcare centers across Karnataka. Karnataka has the most, it's got 26. Then there's Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Manipur, Odisha, and Tamil Nadu. So roughly it covers around 1.5 million people. The evaluations, of course, found that it outperformed other management arrangements on service delivery, even though there was high staff turnover. But then the fact that they've done well, right? That this is an example of where contracting it out to NGOs has worked, where a PPP model has worked well. The standard counter example to this is the state of Kerala.
Right.
Here that they've invested in their own public health and education system rather than routing its delivery through NGOs. And it also scores very high in the Niti Aayog's health index. It's 82.2 versus Bihar, which is a 31. But of course, we need to keep in mind that this is a very local, very thing to the local ecosystem, right? The explanation given is that Kerala's decentralized governance and sustained public investment is what makes this work, right? It might not work in other states. So keeping this context in mind, Ankita, if you had one policy change that would make it easier for small, credible NGOs like yours to formally partner with the government on service delivery, what do you think it will be from a policy side?
So looking at these examples from the success of Karuna Trust to the state-led model in Kerala, it's clear that contracting can work out beautifully, but only if monitoring and payment systems aren't broken. What I mean to say is, if I could ask for just one realistic policy change to help credible small NGOs like ourselves to partner with the state, it would be that the government needs to create a fast track, decentralized, single window, clearance and standardized MOU portal. This is for the localized and the vetted foundations. Okay. Now, right now, the formal bureaucracy which is required for any small NGO to partner with a local government school or an urban healthcare center, it's incredibly fragmented and slow. It can take us months just to get the permission to set up something as simple as a library or a skilling center inside the units, even when we are bringing our own corporate funding to the table. Now, if the state government can standardize a very transparent, performance-based template for such local and smaller partnerships and delegate the approval power directly to the district level officers based on clear compliance metrics, it can change everything. It will allow credible foundations to bypass that massive institutional delays, get onto the ground immediately, and let us focus our energy entirely on what we are doing best, which is delivering the last mile impact and building community trust.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think there shouldn't be a deterrence there, right? Because as it is,
Right.
this is a tough area to operate in. And on top of that, you have the additional caveat where the government is not really supportive. Yeah, very valid points, Ankita. And thanks for sharing that. Because I think it should be a synchronized act, right, between the
Yes.
government and the society. You can't expect the society to be doing the heavy lifting with the government just sitting back, right? So this is great. So we don't have much time, but we'll touch upon the markets. I just wanted to I have just one question there. It's broadly around the CSR, that's the corporate social responsibility. I mean, when it comes to the markets, we know it's all about money, right? And it's also a very important aspect. Funding is a very important aspect for any, especially NGOs, right? Because to get things done, you need the funds. So where does the money come from, and how does that shape the incentives, right? So under the Companies Act back in 2013, so I'll just give a bit of a background for our listeners about how CSR came in. So in 2013, under the Companies Act, the companies that were above a certain threshold, so they looked at three different categories. One where the net worth is of 500 crores or more. The second is a turnover of 1,000 crores or more, or a net profit of 5 crores or more.
Right.
And they're legally required, so it's mandated that they spend at least 2% of the average net profit over the preceding 3 years on CSR, which is called the corporate social responsibility. So this was, in a way, has created a large mandated pool of funding that NGOs can tap into. Okay. So that one idea that you mentioned too would be for those who would be seeking these funds. So the CSR funding is also has been criticized as well for chasing maybe more visibility, short project cycles, as you had mentioned earlier, right? Rather than focusing on the sustained, crucial long-term outcomes. So there has been criticism about this whole CSR from the onset, but there has been. We'll look at the good that it's done at this point. So have you found corporate funders sort of willing to? You did mention this, right? You look at work for the long term
Right.
multi-year infrastructure work and other things, and that's when you need the funds for a long term. You can't just churn something out in March just before the financial year comes to a close, right? So, but have you found funders willing to commit for this long term funding rather than tied to a single sort of a more visible intervention?
So this is a challenge that every grassroots foundation faces. Even
Yeah.
when we started Avant 3 years ago, a lot of the initial corporate conversations that we had were heavily focused on only short-term and high visibility interventions. Things where they could come in quickly, get a photograph, close the project cycle in a few months, and just vanish. Now,
Yep.
but over the last 3 years, we have worked incredibly hard to shift that perspective, and the response has been amazing. We have built deep multi-layer relationships with corporate partners who now come back to work with us year after year. They believe in our long-term vision because they've seen the actual on-ground impact of our work. It genuinely resonates with them, and they come back to support us. Now, when you show a corporate partner clean data, financial transparency, as I mentioned before, and real execution, real on ground work, like when we do with our government infrastructure or the, upskilling campaign, now their mindset changes. They move away from just wanting a quick transaction, a transactional checkbox to actively wanting to co-design sustainable long-term assets with us. So yes, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of consistent pressure, presence on the ground to build that level of trust. But when corporations see verified impact, they absolutely become willing to invest in a multi-year structural change rather than just a one-off event.
Yeah, so well put, right? I think it eventually comes down to that, right? It's the trust and the
True.
integrity with which each NGO would be working,
Right.
and eventually the CSR funds, as we had also earlier touched upon, it shouldn't just be a checkbox, right? Because that's what's
Correct.
happening now. Because it's mandated, it's just a checkbox. You look for a quick, somebody who you can fund to, and then making sure that you can catch a few eyeballs, and then that's it. You close the project. You're not looking at a long-term kind of a commitment, right? So that's great. We need to close now, but do you have anything that you would like to just, maybe some thoughts that we did not cover that you would like to just highlight or bring up?
So, my final thought really brings me back to why we do this in the first place. Over the last 3 years on the ground with Avant Welfare Foundation, the biggest lesson that we have learned is that sustainable change, it cannot happen in a silo. You cannot solve complex societal problems by relying on any of these pillars, just one pillar. You have to have all of it together. If
Right.
we want real lasting transformation, whether it's inside schools, healthcare systems, or the environment, we need all three forces working in sync. We need the state to provide the solid institutional framework and scale. We need the market to bring in the operational efficiency, innovation, and long term corporate partnerships. And we also need the civil society to be there, to be the anchor on the ground, which builds trust and ensures empathetic last mile delivery. Now, at the end of the day, it's not about quick fixes or one off check boxes that we're looking at. It's about building deep, multi-year relationship and staying consistent. It's difficult, but it's possible. And when we combine these resources on a real on-ground trust, that is when we will turn simple service delivery into a true generational impact.
Thank you so much, Ankita. So well said, right? And that's so priceless, right? The trust that one builds through this relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Ankita.
My pleasure, Ms. Malathi. It's always a pleasure to, discuss things with you. And if any of this can actually change even a little bit into an existing structure, I think that's going to be fruitful for all of us.
Yes, it's wonderful. And these conversations have to happen, Ankita. I think that it's important when these conversations happen, even in society, so that we are informed citizens. Often, we think that it's the other, like you mentioned, the three pillars. We think it's the other pillar, either the markets, the governments who have to make a difference. But as individuals, if you think of the three pillars as Venn diagram, right? Three circles.
Right.
Intersection of those three where the individual resides, right? So having an informed society is what makes those genuine democratic kind of participation possible, and it's with those checks and balances that we can keep the government and the markets also stay honest.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Ankita, and I really enjoyed this conversation with you, and looking forward to seeing what else Avant Welfare Foundation kind of turns out, in the years to come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So this has been the All Things Policy podcast. I'm Malathi Renati, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.